CBS Evening News.
Americans rely on the news media for information about events occurring around the world. News, especially television news, exerts a powerful influence on our perceptions, telling us which events are important and shaping our understanding of the issues. Given the central role played by the United States in the Middle East conflict, and thus the vital role played by American voters, influencing U.S. media coverage of the conflict is crucial. Controlling the images and words used to explain the conflict has become an important extension of the struggle.
Israel is really fighting a war on two fronts. The first is a military campaign being waged in the occupied territories against the Palestinian people. And the second is a PR campaign being waged here in the US through the American media to ensure continued support for Israel's occupation. Alon Pincus, Consul General for Israel in New York and the coordinator of Israel's PR efforts, was recently quoted as saying, "We are currently in a conflict with the Palestinians, and engaging in a successful PR campaign is part of winning the conflict." In addition to the military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, Israel is also involved in an attempt to ideologically occupy the American media.
The roots of Israel's public relations campaign go back to the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon that earned it worldwide criticism, in particular the massacre of Palestinian civilians at the refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila. To the Israeli government, the problem was not the deaths of thousands of civilians. Rather, it was the damage to Israel's public image, a public relations disaster in need of damage control.
They surrounded Beirut. In 3 months, 17,500 people, almost all of them civilians, were killed. I saw many thousands of their bodies. Then came the massacre of Sabra and Shatila by Israel's own allies as the camp was surrounded by Israeli troops. And they desperately said, what went wrong? It was concluded that the problem was there wasn't good enough public relations.
After the public relations disaster of Lebanon, Israel decided to set up permanent institutional structures to control how Americans would think about the Middle East. In 1983, Israel launched the Hasbara project, the aim of which was to ensure good press in the US media. The goal was to train Israeli diplomats in communications and public relations. For example, they trained press officers in Israeli consulates in the US to ensure that American journalists would write stories favorable to Israel. As one of these press officers said in the 1980s, he had breakfast, lunch, and dinner with journalists, and that a typical day would involve conversations with producers at leading news and TV talk shows about the content of the program. He described it as, in fact, quote, a joint formulation of ideas. This targeting of the American media goes on in the present day.
The Israeli press office is spitting out press releases, statements, information all the time. So you could sit in a bureau in Jerusalem and file stories from there all the time without really having to have much imagination or have much energy or have much drive. Palestine Authority press office is almost useless, and they certainly aren't providing you with ready-made stories the way the Israeli press office is.
Because of lack of access to Palestinian officials in the West Bank and the sophistication of Israel's PR techniques inside Israel, a lot of times the stories are already tilted in Israel's favor before they ever leave American journalists sitting in the area.
When you're talking about how the story is covered from the U.S., the propaganda machine is even more effective than it is in Israel.
You can see all of the, kind of pressure groups who, write campaigns of letters to the editor against, news outlets and ask for, demand that stories be changed or that, that reporters be fired.
The abuse against a journalist is something you just have to take into account. If you, both literally and metaphorically, if you work in the Middle East, you've got to take the sticks and stones. What I object to is that my American colleagues don't seem to be prepared to do that.
And even in Israel itself, you can find the main daily newspapers, like Haaretz, for example, provides coverage on the ground and analysis, some of which has views on the conflict that that would be almost beyond the pale for an American journalist, say at the New York Times, to write.
The main major television news networks and newspapers in the United States have long ago got their fear to be supreme over their duties as journalists. They are not monitoring the centers of power when it comes to the relationship between America and the Middle East, Israel and America and the Arabs and the Palestinians. They will not ask the right questions, they will not report it using the correct words, they will not confront the reality, and they've given up. And I think once you acquire fear, it's very difficult to get rid of it.
You'll still find thousands of sock puppets and Hasbara trolls defending the massacre across the web. I've already covered on this show how right-wing groups like the Yesha Council of Settlements have a course teaching Israelis how to edit Wikipedia in a pro-Zionist fashion. But the information war doesn't stop with Wikipedia. But not all Hasbara trolls are volunteers. You see, last fall, The Independent reported that the Israeli government offers scholarships to students at several universities if they share pro-Israel tweets and Facebook posts with foreign audiences. And considering Twitter is one of the most popular places to share information real time, it's been an incredibly useful tool to relay facts about the horrors on the ground in Gaza. Which could be why the Israeli government has honed in on the resource to spread as much Hasbara as it possibly can. Twitter Hasbara ranges from paid-for promoted tweets by PM Netanyahu declaring unrelenting Hamas rocket fire and the IDF spokesperson justifying the shelling of civilian neighborhoods to a never-ending stream of infographics. Like this one, which asks, when does a house become a legitimate military target, showing a multi-tiered house full of rockets and a command center. Fascinating how we haven't even seen one photo of a house that looks remotely like these scary bunkers they're telling us litter Gaza. But as if this wasn't ridiculous enough, check out this image tweeted by the IDF, saying that Israel uses weapons to protect civilians, while Hamas uses civilians to protect its weapons, showing a house full of missiles with a bunch of people standing on its roof. So according to Israel, every single house they're targeting or shelling has people in it protecting weapons. Once again, never has this been proven with actual evidence. And throughout this offensive, the only proven case of weapons being stored in a residential area was the discovery of rockets in an abandoned UN school. But considering how Gaza is one of the most densely populated places on Earth, with a population of 1.8 million people, it's nearly impossible to heavily shell any place in Gaza without a civilian toll. And not only that, but the people who have died inside their homes have nowhere else to go. Gaza is under siege from every side, with every border closed. Just this week, I spoke to Gaza resident Suha Najjar, who debunked the human shield claim.
I've been considered being used as a human shield by Hamas because I'm an American here and I'm staying in my house. But no, when I got the phone call, and I got a phone call today from Israel and I refused to answer, telling me that I have to leave my home and I have to evacuate, I say no, I don't want to, because this is my home and I'm not going to leave it. And then what Israel does is uses that and says, well, see, Hamas is telling people to stay in their homes, they're using them as human shields. But this is something that's coming to the people. It's their right to stay in their home.
Right, exactly.
And I think the only time I've ever seen human shields being used is by Israeli soldiers when they take over buildings and they leave. They keep civilians inside the buildings as they shoot from the top.
Amazingly, Israel has used human shields. And here are just 3 examples in the last 5 years. All right, so if both sides use this tactic, can we stop using the term to legitimize murder? Look, the term human shield has become the crux of Hasbara, and it's being used to absolve Israel of responsibility every time it bombs a hospital, refugee center, or home, killing civilians en masse. Apparently, as long as entities operate behind an official army and sophisticated weaponry sanctioned by the West, conducting terrorism against civilians is legitimate.
Moetzet Yesh, in conjunction with My Israel, has arranged an instruction day for wiki editors. The goal of the day is to teach people how to edit in Wikipedia which is the #1 source of information today in the world. As a way of example, if someone searches the Gaza flotilla, we want to be there. We want to be the guys who influence what is written there, how it's written, and to ensure that it's balanced and Zionist in nature.
All right, to Tel Aviv now, as cash-strapped Israeli students have found a new way to relieve their financial plight. They can get easy money by simply posting positive tweets for the government and clicking the like button. It's after authorities came up with the idea of offering youngsters salaries and even scholarships for protection of the government's interests in fighting anti-Semitism on the web. Ironically, though, the father of the digital diplomacy program has come under fire for posting racist comments, the very thing he was meant to be combating.
Lidor Bar David has been doing it for a while, but as a volunteer.
It's another way to a student to give back to society. Even in Israel, you have a bunch of people, a few people at the Foreign Affairs Ministry office who do social media for their living. So it's okay for people to getting a salary on this kind of work.
The new student sales force will share a PR commission pot of nearly $1 million. And in universities across the country, they'll eventually even receive scholarships for waging Israel's digital diplomacy.
So you're basically turning a human being into a human commercial.
Uri Agnon is a second-year philosophy student who says he won't be signing up. He's angry with his government trying to tell him what to think.
Instead of trying to make Israel a good democracy, for instance, giving out scholarships for people that will try to make this place a better place, he gives out scholarships for people to say that it's a good place. I mean, if this was such a good place, then these people would tell it anyways.
Those in opposition say there will be some major whitewashing, and using students to tweet pro-Israeli propaganda is part of that.
I think the Prime Minister's office is trying to cover up the human rights violations that are happening by paying young folks to be involved. I think he'd be better off investing the funds in education, in infrastructure, in community development that he hasn't done in decades.
Israelis are no stranger to war, but at the online frontline, it's an unenviable battle to turn public perception of Israel from zero to zeitgeist.
Propaganda works to make one man's freedom fighter another man's terrorist. And you know, I can't imagine any other country massacring almost 1,000 people and still blame the people for committing self-genocide rather than the bombs, guns, and tanks that actually killed them. But hey, that's just the magic of Hasbara.